valid question to say, is this true? So this guy, you're telling me they just sifted through the papers and found some good old police work what the Biden administration didn't do. So
that's what they're saying. That's what they're reporting. That's exactly what's being reported.
I will say, I do think that is possible.
Yeah,
like it is.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I stumbled across this video where a CNN panel is discussing the FBI finally catching the January 6th pipe bomber, and here's the thing that caught my attention. They solved this case using evidence they already had for 5 years, which raises some serious questions about what the previous administration was doing this whole time. Kash Patel and Don Jr. both come on with some pointed questions about why this case just sat there, and even some of the panelists admit there are legitimate answers that need to be gotten here, so make sure you watch until the end. Please comment down below where you are watching from. I really love to see people from all over the world connecting in here. Alright now, let's get into the video.
Actually, welcome back. A cold case suddenly turns hot after the feds arrest a suspect in that pipe bomb mystery. For the last 5 years, no one knew who planted this device in the nation's capital the night before January 6th. And that didn't stop podcast hosts from pushing conspiracies about it, including the FBI's current deputy director.
There is a massive cover-up because the person who planted those pipe bombs, they don't want you to know who it was because it's either a connected anti-Trump insider or this was an inside job. This was a setup. I have zero doubt.
Fast forward to now and a dose of truth serum, it seems.
I was paid in the past, Sean, for my opinions. That's clear. And one day I'll be back in that space. But that's not what I'm paid for now. I'm paid to be your deputy director, and we base investigations on facts. The difference between us and them is, we evolve. As information and new inputs come out, we can produce different outputs because that's what we believe in. We believe in facts and investigations guided by facts.
Look, it's worth noting that sources say that the suspect told them that he believes the 2020 election was stolen. That seems to be a very pertinent piece of information here. But I will say, let me just start by saying, the fact that this arrest was made with no new information, just existing information, it does raise a lot of questions about what was going on in the FBI over the last 4 years and why this was missed. However, I think Dan Bongino is telling on himself because he peddled a conspiracy that this was an inside job by the FBI, which it was not. And owning up to that, give him credit for that too. Owning up to it is important and good.
Abby, I don't know if we can give him credit for that. And I don't even think he meant to. I'd like to say, where in the world do they find this audacity? Is it underneath the couch? I mean, is it in between your pocket? Audacity is crazy. He was telling us straight up without even thinking that he was telling on himself. I just want to do a quick little timeline because I was so interested because he was such a popular podcaster and was such a personality who runs everything. So when this first happened, as he just said, massive conspiracy theory. September 2022, on his podcast, he was like, I believe, and I have been told with good authority, that the person who's responsible is a connected anti-Trumper. And he said that it ultimately will be one of the biggest conspiracy theories in America. I'm fast forwarding because I don't want to go through all the hits that I have. Early 2024, still a podcaster. Again, the same thing. He has someone on from Revolver News who goes into why this is such a deep issue within the FBI, and it's a big critical problem because they are a massive cover-up. And then the last date, because I'm like, how do we get to this point? As recently as November 2024, January 2025, before he was actually appointed, he's still holding feet to the fire saying the FBI needs to say that this is a corruption. And he would not walk it back. And he's saying he was paid to make up this story.
It's so important for people who consume that type of content to understand that they are being conned.
Correct.
That people are just making things up and selling it to them as fact. And then when they're in a position of power, kind of like the Epstein files, they then come out and they say, oh, oops, my bad. I was paid to just say things for clicks and for views.
All right, so let us talk about what is actually interesting about this story. Because yes, they finally arrested someone for the pipe bombs after 5 years. 5 years of this case just sitting there. And what is fascinating is that Abby herself raises the question that I think everyone should be asking. She said, Abby said this: the fact that this arrest was made with no new information, just existing information, it does raise a lot of questions about what was going on in the FBI over the last 4 years and why this was missed. Did you catch that? No new information. They solved this case using evidence they already had. So the obvious question is, why did it take this long? What was the FBI doing for 4 years? Because if all it took was someone actually looking at the existing files, that means either there was massive incompetence or there was something else going on. Now look, I want to be fair here. Dan Bongino did push theories about this case when he was a podcaster, and he acknowledged that on camera. He said, Dan said this: I was paid in the past for my opinions. That is clear. And one day I will be back in that space. But that is not what I am paid for now. I am paid to be your deputy director, and we based investigations on facts. The difference between us and them is we evolve as information and new inputs come out. And honestly, I think that is actually how it should work. When you are a commentator, you speculate, you analyze, you give your opinions based on what you know at the time. When you are in a position of actual authority, you follow the evidence. That is not hypocrisy. That is understanding the difference between being a pundit and being a law enforcement official. Abby even acknowledged this. She said owning up to it is important and good, and she is right. The guy is saying, look, I had opinions before. Now I have responsibilities. I think we should be able to recognize that as a reasonable position, even if we disagree with his previous takes. But here is what keeps nagging at me. If the evidence was there the whole time, what does that say about the priorities of the previous leadership at the FBI? Were they more focused on other investigations? Were they deliberately slow-walking this one? I do not know the answer, but I think those are legitimate questions that deserve real answers.
I mean, that is...
We should say, just
ridiculous.
for our own sake and for the audience's sake, that this person is apparently giving conflicting answers to investigators, that he has said that he doesn't believe that the 2020 election was legitimate, but he's also said a lot of things that we don't know the details of, but it has apparently given investigators the assumption that's being conveyed in reports.
We're talking about this guy who's the deputy director.
Because we don't want to do what Dan Bongino did, which is to establish facts that are not in evidence.
Well, I guess what I'm...
So what we should be doing...
The only fact that I'm establishing in evidence is that, according to the FBI, this was not an FBI plant.
It was not.
That's the only fact I know at this moment.
And Mr. Bongino,
so that's the only one I'm putting on the table.
He wasn't operating on facts at all when he was making these inferences. There were no facts and evidence. What we have now is a couple of slivers of evidence that we can draw inferences from, but they are not established. They're just using our judgments. So we shouldn't make overbroad conclusions.
Here's the problem. Here's this popular podcaster who has this huge audience, and people believe in conspiracy theories. You know that, especially deep MAGA. They want to believe in it. Want to believe in. So now this guy has this entire, I guess he's a senior law enforcement official now, and now he's like, I'm getting paid to look at the evidence, and the evidence says, actually, I was wrong, but he won't even admit that he's wrong. And so that is my issue in the world that we live in, where we don't look for facts, that we just trust anything anyone says, and I believe that's why this administration is in the place that it is right now, and how this president got elected, running on conspiracy theories, and now we're saying, okay, it's not true.
I don't disagree
no, my bad,
I don't disagree
it's
with
wrong.
any of that. I think we have a different perspective, though, insofar as I think this is an optimistic sign. It's sort of valuable to see somebody who was previously a very conspiratorial podcaster and entertainer, by his own admission, become the deputy director of the FBI and become an institutionalist. He's protecting the...
Well, he said for now.
He said he'll go
because
back.
he's going to go back and maybe do the same thing.
He's out of the institution,
And in
but
the
the
meantime,
institution is molding and shaping.
In the meantime, there was earlier this year a horrible conspiracy about a person who was not the bomber. They're ruining people's lives over this stuff. There is damage being done. And I don't know that there was I'll give him credit for saying it, but not enough contrition for the lives.
Not enough contrition.
Well, one thing I want to say, though, is that you had said something about the election being stolen. He'd said that there's evidently a lot of far left things that he had views on, so we don't really know what his political view is at this point. I read that he was a far left, the bomber.
Oh,
okay.
It doesn't even matter what matters the most.
No, it matters. No, it matters a little bit. Here's why.
We're talking about Dan Bongino.
I know, but here's why it matters. Because what Dan Bongino said was that this comes from the left, and therefore they don't want people to know who did it.
He said a lot more than that.
He did say a lot more than that, but That was one thing he said. So if that turned out to be true, look, the problem is, why didn't the FBI catch this guy? All they had to do is go look at evidence that pulled it up. No, there is a question there. Why didn't they? So is it incompetence?
Do you believe what's coming from the FBI right now? I can't believe anything.
It's a valid question.
It's a valid question to say, is this true? So this guy, you're telling me they just sifted through the papers and found some good old police work what the Biden administration didn't do. So
that's what they're saying. That's what they're reporting. That's exactly what's being reported.
I will say, I do think that is possible.
Yeah,
like it is actually possible
it's a valid
that
question.
this information was in their possession, and whether it was bad police work or indifference or whatever. I don't know what it was, but I do think that there are.
Now, there is a lot of crosstalk in this segment, and I think it is worth sorting through, because there are actually some interesting points being made on both sides if you listen carefully. Noah makes an observation that I think is worth considering. He talks about the suspect and says, Noah said this. This person is apparently giving conflicting answers to investigators. He has said that he does not believe that the 2020 election was legitimate, but he has also said a lot of things that we do not know the details of. So we have a suspect giving contradictory information. That is important context. We do not actually know the full picture yet. The investigation is ongoing, and I think Noah is right to pump the brakes a little bit on drawing too many conclusions before we have all the facts. He also said something else that I found interesting. He called it an optimistic sign that someone who was previously a conspiratorial podcaster can become the deputy director and become an institutionalist. Now look, I know a lot of people will roll their eyes at that, but think about it. What do we actually want from people in positions of power? We want them to take their responsibilities seriously. We want them to follow evidence instead of speculation. If Dan Bongino is doing that now, is that not what we should want? But then Carrie asks the question that I think cuts to the heart of this whole thing. Carrie said this. So you are telling me they just pushed through the papers and found some good old police work that the prior administration did not do? And that is the question. That is the question that deserves a real answer. Because if it really was just a matter of someone finally doing the work, then what was everyone doing before? Why did it take a change in leadership for this case to get solved? Abby acknowledged this too. She said the information was in their possession. Whether it was bad police work or indifference, she does not know. But she agrees there are answers that need to be gotten, and I respect that she is willing to say that, even though it does not make the previous administration look good.
There are answers that need to be gotten about that.
It was very bizarre. And by the way, one last thing, he put a bomb at both the Republican and the Democrat side. So the whole thing is weird to begin with.
Yeah,
and he's walking around, he's on video, he has a phone, no one can find him.
Well, let me actually, since we were talking about this, let me play what Kash Patel and Don Jr. were saying about this earlier.
In this instance, the prior administration had the same exact information that this FBI had access to and chose not to put the resources on target. Why they didn't want to do that is a question for them, but it was an intentional failure.
I never understood how this could just disappear. I mean, 2 pipe bombs targeting the headquarters of the Republican Party, targeting the headquarters of the Democrat Party. That, to me, is a far greater threat than any of the nonsense, a grandma taking a selfie inside of January 6th, and yet it just disappeared. It's almost like that was the backup plan if they didn't get what they wanted out of January 6th, which to me seems like a very clear setup operation.
And look, you're absolutely right.
So one conspiracy gives way to another, it
right.
seems.
So Kash Patel and Don Jr. and Dan Bongino are now on this conspiracy theory treadmill where one gets disproven and they jump to the next. The problem is Dan Bongino, like a bunch of other MAGA commentators, got super rich off of peddling straight lies and is now coming into the friction of actually being in a position of power. There's a chance that he goes and lies more, but think about how many lives he ruined, how many lies he told. He went on a whole few-month campaign about Vance Bolter, about all this stuff. All these lies that he's told will culminate into tricking Americans. I used to go to Trump rallies during his campaign, and I would debate with his supporters. That was my thing, debating his supporters. I'll never forget, there was this one woman with American flag face paint. I asked her who her favorite podcaster was. She said Dan Bongino. I asked her if she would vote for Putin or Kamala if she could choose. She said, I'd vote for Vladimir Putin. Kamala's a traitor to this country. So this is the effect that Dan Bongino is having when he's lying to Americans who just want to love their country. They think they love their country.
So Hal Lambert raises a point here that I think gets overlooked. He said the bomber put a device at both the Republican and Democrat headquarters, both sides. So whatever this person's motivations were, they were targeting the entire political system, not just one party. That is important context that often gets lost in the partisan framing of this story. Then they play the clips from Kash Patel and Don Jr. And look, I know this panel is not going to give them a fair shake, but let us actually listen to what they said. Cash said this: the prior administration had the same exact information that this FBI had access to and chose not to put the resources on target. Why? They did not want to do that is a question for them, but it was an intentional failure. Now, you can disagree with the word intentional. Maybe it was incompetence instead of intent, but the underlying point stands. They had the information. They did not act on it. Now someone else comes in, and suddenly the case gets solved. That pattern raises questions. Don Jr. made a point about priorities that I think resonates with a lot of people. He said, Don Jr. said this: 2 pipe bombs targeting the headquarters of the Republican Party, targeting the headquarters of the Democrat Party. That to me is a far greater threat than any of the nonsense. You know, a grandma taking a selfie inside of January 6th, and yet it just disappeared. And whatever you think about how he phrased it, the underlying question is valid. How do you prioritize? You have limited resources. You have multiple investigations. How do you decide what gets attention and what does not? A lot of Americans feel like the priorities over the last few years have been skewed, that certain things got massive attention, while other things, like this case, just sat there. Now, the panel dismisses this as just another conspiracy theory, and maybe they are right that some people take it too far. But I think there is a difference between wild speculation and legitimate questions about institutional priorities and competence. And right now, I do not think we have satisfying answers to those questions. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, not a massive conspiracy, not pure incompetence. Probably some combination of bureaucratic failures, shifting priorities, and maybe some institutional bias about what cases matter most. But we deserve transparency about what actually happened. And hopefully, this arrest is just the beginning of getting those answers. So, what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.